Howdy, sports fans, and welcome to our next installment in our unit on composition, melody writing. Today we're going to be talking about triads. So, what exactly is a triad aside from the Chinese mafia? A triad is three notes stacked into thirds. That's it. It's a very simple structure. It's a very common structure, and you'll recognize it the first time that you see it. Before the early Baroque period, Baroque music period was 16 to 1750 or so. Music that had multiple instruments was written more like multiple melodies played at the same time. This was called horizontal composition. It was really just thinking a melody from the start to the finish, and how did those melodies go against each other? How did they sound when they were together? A really simple example you could think of is something like "Row, row, row your boat," where you have multiple layers of melody, "Row, row, row your boat, row, row, row your boat," going at the same time, but slightly offsets from each other. So you end up with this horizontal melodies that don't really seem to be chords, but they do harmonically lined up. This particular type of thinking was called counterpoint, but we'll talk about it in terms of horizontal composition. Now, during the Baroque period, composers started thinking about sounds and patterns that the notes made when they were stacked up on top of one another. So instead of just thinking of individual voices having individual melodies, they started thinking of individual melodies being supported by vertical structures beneath them. This concept is called harmonic thinking, and it was really the beginning of chord progressions, which I'm sure is a term that is quite familiar to you. So in order to build a triad, we start with a root note. The root is basically the lowest note in a triad. So we can pick any note that we want, and then we're just going to build thirds above it. So here we have a C, and we've added an E over top. I'm showing both bass and treble clef. This is a piano staff. Just for those of you who are bass clef readers, or maybe for those of you who don't read both clefs, just to know that I'm basically doubling or an octave lower, just for those who are more comfortable reading in that octave. After that, we add one more third. Here we have our completed triad. We also call a triad a chord, and all triads are chords. So I'm going to show you a couple of more examples. I can take, oopsie, not that. I can take any note, let's say, start with maybe a G here. I can stack in thirds, and you can see I've got a little bit of a magnetic snap of this ghost note, which shows me where I'm going to place the next one. So if I go 1, 2, spaces above, now I've got a third, and now I add them together, and I've got a complete triad. And you'll recognize that as a major chord. I can do another one here. So if I start on an F, a third above, and a third above, I end up with F major. Now, both of these are major. All triads are not automatically major. I'm going to start here. I'll do one in the bass clef. And let's say if I start on a D. If I build my triad on a D, I get D minor. And I'll build that here in the treble clef as well. So now I've got a minor chord. So the act of building a triad does not necessarily make a major or a minor chord. We can even get things like, let's say, like a diminished chord. Right, quite a bit of an ugly sounding chord, and it has a very specific function. But regardless, these are all triads. Back to our notes. So why do triads even matter? Why do we learn about them? Very, very few melodies today are written over one single chord the whole time. If you'll remember this melody here, we made this last week. This was our 8-bar period at the top here, with the melody set into two 4-bar phrases. and I set an accompaniment below it. So I'm going to pop back over to Sibelius here. Where are you? There we go. And you'll hear that these chords change over time. So that melody would be really, really dull if we set it over the same chord, and it wouldn't even necessarily work to have it in the same chord all the time. And although as I look at it, yeah, it would. I mean, it would mostly work. It would. There would be some clashing points, but obviously we've set our chords, different chords across underneath the melody. We're actually going to we'll be learning how to do this, setting chords against a melody you've already written. So just to recap here, the harmonies that I added use lots of different chords. Some are triads or some are not. The chords change from measure to measure. Now, I should state that you don't have to change chords every measure, and you don't have to stay on a chord for an entire measure. It could be for half a measure. In our case, we were writing in 2/4, so having a chord change every 2 beats was fast enough. I didn't need to change it more than that. All of the chords are triads that are built on the melody, and we'll look at that a little bit later. Now, not all chords are triads, and this is sort of important to note. They're not completely interchangeable concepts. There are many different kinds of chords, but these examples here are none of these are triads. Most of them, like these ones, the C add 9, the A suspended 4, and the E7 suspended 4, all have 4 notes in them. And the G major first inversion has 3 notes in it. So it would be the only one called a triad, normally, tri being 3. But because it's not a stack of thirds, this can't be called a triad. I'll pop back into Sibelius here. And I'm going to fast forward to our chords here. And we'll just give these a listen. So this first chord here is our C add 9. Beautiful chord. It's actually one of my favorite chords of all time. We have a G major first inversion. So a G major also can look like this. Let's go down here. Each of these groups of 3 is a G triad, but when we invert it like this, we get something that's not a triad, still a G major chord. And we've got our A suspended 4 and E7 sus 4. Beautiful chords that all have functions within the key of C major, but not until you get into much more advanced music. So for the purpose of what we're doing today, we're just sticking with triads, and triads will get you very, very far. Now here's how we build a triad. We start with the 8 notes in our C major scale. I'm using C major once again because this is it's a pretty benign key. There's no sharps or flats, so it's very simple. But you could do this in literally any key. It wouldn't make a difference. So we'll start with each scale note, and then we'll add the 2/3 above it, just like we did in that early example. So here's all 8 notes. You can see the C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, same as here, but we've built the 2/3 directly on top. These are all the possible triads in C major. All the possible, I should say, unmodified triads, just using the notes that are in the key of C. Now, if you'll remember, each note in the scale gets a number, and we call that a scale degree. So here's our completed scale. It doesn't matter that this C is down here and this C is down here. We could add another C above. They would all be the one note, the tonic note, if you'll remember that particular phrase or particular word. So it doesn't matter what octave they're in. They all serve the same functions, the one note, the two note, etc. Triads are numbered based on that exact same system. So if we take our triads from before, where we had built on C, D, E, F, G, and so on, we number them the exact same way, 1 through 7. Now you'll notice there's no 8, and that was done on purpose, because the 8 chord is just the 1 chord but higher, which doesn't really matter. I can write a 1 chord anywhere I want, it's still a 1 chord. In fact, that's a pretty fundamental fact of harmony, that pitches, once we get through the whole octave, we're just coming around in circles. Now, we use numbers all over the place in music. Sometimes it's for fingerings on piano and guitar. Sometimes it could be for just many, many different reasons. But we have a specific notation that we use for chords, and these are Roman numerals. Those of you who were in my classes for this discussion, Roman numerals look like this: 1, 2, 3, 4 through 7, and they can be uppercase and they can be lowercase, which is what's really useful about them. And when possible, I'll use both. I'll put one in brackets and the other not. For now, it's really only important to know the number, not necessarily the Roman numeral. The reasons that we use Roman numerals are a little bit more complicated. It has to do with showing how chords are major or minor or whatever, but we'll worry about that in a future lesson. For now, just be concerned with the fact that 1 through 7. So let's do a quick review. A triad is a set of 3 notes. Triads are built into thirds above the root note, and the root is a note from the scale/key we are working with. I forgot to put in this review, I think, that a triad is a chord, but not all chords are triads. Maybe I did remember. The triads are referred to with numbers based on the scale degree of the root of the chord. And we use Roman numerals instead of regular numbers to refer to chords whenever possible. So that's it. That is all the information in this one. I'm going to give you some practice. For my online students, you're going to be using Tone Savvy because it's just so much faster than writing out triads by hand. So if you have that as an option, I absolutely encourage you to use Tone Savvy. I will create a very short 30 to 60 second tutorial on how to do that, just to make your life a lot easier. You'll see how simple it actually is as long as you're looking at the information that it provides you. For all my offline students or my students that are taking this course remotely from another school, there will be a paper copy offered of this assignment called Triads Practice, and you'll be filling that out by hand. So that's it for this lesson. Our next lesson, we will be using these triads against the melodies that we've written. Okay, thanks very much. Don't forget to smash that like and subscribe. No, I'm kidding. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.